available to anyone after. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining. My name is Natalie and I'm the program manager at South Central Kansas Economic Development District. Today we are hosting a webinar with Sam Foreman of Foreman Law. And so in just a few minutes, we'll turn over to him and have him introduce himself and then walk us through at a high level, things to consider if you're considering purchasing a business. At the end of his presentation, we'll also leave time open for anyone who has some questions, and he'll walk us through answers. So I'm really excited to have Sam. We're beginning to establish a relationship so that we can really make him available to entrepreneurs as they guide their way through their entrepreneurial journey. In addition to Sam, we also have Seth. If you could just wave real quick. Seth is our digital marketing intern. He is cleaning up our house from a digital and marketing standpoint, and then will be available as entrepreneurs need digital and marketing advice to drive their business. Tyler, if you could do a hello real quick as well. Tyler is our program coordinator and really works with us across every phase of the business. So he is working with me on, many of you have probably interacted with him. He's helping me field all of the business development calls and then works with entrepreneurs as they're beginning to close their loan. And then he also assists you guys with payment questions. So he is really a great resource for entrepreneurs in the community because he can help you get connected with just about any type of resource. So just as a reminder, SCED is a nonprofit. We assist entrepreneurs with gaining access to capital. We can do this through offering loans at the micro, mid-size, and commercial real estate level. So our micro loans, remember, are currently at a lower interest rate of 3.5%. We will have this lower interest rate available through June 30th. You can take out loans up to $50,000 in the SBA microloan. And then we have multiple options in the mid-size loan. So anything over $50,000 up to $300,000. And then we also have a loan program for entrepreneurs seeking to purchase commercial real estate. Don't worry about which one you fit into. All that you need to do is just give us a call. We'll walk you through eligibility, learn more about your concept, discuss your business model, and then we'll make recommendations on what we believe is the right loan option for you. So Seth, if you could throw our contact information into the chat. I would recommend that everyone start with Tyler. So we will send his email and then our direct line out to everyone. So you guys can just schedule a call with us and we'll walk you through and listen what's on your plate. Before I turn it over to Sam, I wanted to let you all know that we are working hard to continue to develop out our webinars. In the next coming months, we have a resource in the area of human resources that will be available in this format. We also have a videographer to come and talk to us about how marketing is trending towards videography and simple steps that you can take in your small business. We'll also be coordinating a QuickBooks training and then a health and wellness topic. So lots of new topics coming towards you. We're planning those all out. Again, our information is in the chat. So contact us and also let us know what you'd like to hear from some of these webinars. So with that being said, Sam, if you'd like to take over.
Yeah, well, good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here with you. I'm Sam Foreman. I'm an attorney here in Wichita. We've been here for, oh gosh, going on 10 years now. Really love being here, part of the Wichita community. We work with, a lot of small businesses, a lot of startups, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of folks that have identified here's the dream they want to pursue and are looking to go figure out how to make that happen. We love working with folks that are buying businesses or selling businesses. And so today wanted to kind of run through some of that with y'all. Let me get over to my presentation here. As I was telling Natalie and everyone a little bit ago, just recently started using a Mac, and so just getting into that. So can everybody see that okay? My wife helped make sure we got really good branding. I was going to pick something boring and more traditional law firmy type of approach, and she's like, what about this one? What about this one? And so
He did good. I love it.
Thank you. We like it. So here's the disclaimer. This presentation is not intended as legal advice. No attorney-client relationship is formed. It's just intended for general informational purposes only. So would be happy to talk to anyone afterwards that has questions that they'd like to discuss, and see if we can help you all out. Presentation, how to buy a business. What I want to cover today is just at a really high level, some things I think are going to be really useful for you all as you're thinking about how you want to buy a business. And then happy to answer any questions we get as we go through. I think it's really important. And real quickly, can you all hear any background noise on my end, or is the sound coming through okay? Sound coming through okay? Great. Really understand the why. I think it's really important to start there. Some folks come in and they're just thinking, gonna buy a business. Really think about what your why is. Think seller, what is seller really trying to be, as well as thinking about the same, very useful for you in the process. Because where some folks get a little off track is when they're trying to negotiate the deal, they're looking at it solely from the perspective of, I've just got to get the deal done, and they lose sight of what their own priorities are. They lose sight of what the seller's priorities are, and then that can get things off track and limit the ability to get a good deal done on things that really matter. Really take time, I think, to understand what's the value and what are the risks involved from the buyer and the seller perspective. From the buyer perspective, when you're thinking about the value, think about when you look at the business, why are you buying the business? What is the key value that you're trying to lock down? Is it, hey, there's these great customer relationships, there's these great supplier relationships, there's this great brand involved, there's this really key person, there's these key assets, it's a long-standing cash flowing business. Really think about what it is that drives the value for you and how it works, and then what you want to lock down. Because when it comes to putting together the legal documents and trying to make sure that you've got the I's dotted and the T's crossed, and that everything is prioritized through the process around protecting that value, it's really important to understand where that comes from. Same type of thing when you think about the risks. What are the risks that are involved that you're particularly concerned about? For example, if you're buying a business that has one really large customer, and that really large customer doesn't have a long-term contract that you're going to acquire, that's a really high risk to step into. Same type of thing if you're looking at, hey, well, we're going to buy this business and they've got ongoing litigation, or they've got owners that are fighting with each other, or different things like that. Really trying to take a little bit of time and understand what are the risks that need to be managed in the process, so that you can try to position yourself as best you can to avoid those risks, or to decide in the process that, hey, this just isn't the deal for me. When it comes to thinking about the seller from the same type of perspective, are they looking at particular value points? Are they looking at particular risks that they want to try to manage? Maybe their motivation is, I see all these risks as a seller and I just want to get out. I just want to get out from under it. And so that can put you in a good bargaining position to say, hey, I think that these are some things that I can get comfortable with managing. I can talk to this client, I can talk to that customer, whatever it is, and I can get comfortable enough to take on some of these risks, provided that I get some of these trade-offs in the process on things like price or what have you. So, same thing with value. What are they looking to get? Some sellers, at least the owners of the sellers, sometimes they want to stay on for a while. They've built a business that they care about, and they want to stay in the picture because they just like it, and they want to, and maybe they want the cash flows as well. And so thinking about what are the priorities around value and risk, for both parties can really put you in a position to help structure the deal correctly and navigate it appropriately. So once you have kind of that high level, why are you doing it? Why is the seller doing it? What's really important, at least at the 30,000 foot view, then you want to think about building your team, because that's kind of the next level. Because if you can't get comfortable that this is something you really want to do on your own analysis, then don't spend money on building a team and don't spend your time on it if you can knock it out on your own. And knock it out being decide that you're not going to do the deal. Once you've decided that it kind of is something that you want to go forward with, then I think you want to make sure you're thinking intentionally about building your team so that you've got folks that specialize in some of these areas to give you good advice on how to put things together appropriately. Obviously, you want to think about having SCED on your team. It goes without saying. You want to think about having a good banker on your team. That's obviously somebody that would work very closely with SCED. You want to think about when you're talking about, the banking relationship, it's not just, thinking about how are we going to finance the overall transaction, but you're also going to be thinking about, on the other side of the deal, am I going to need a line of credit? How else is this all going to work together? You want to think about having a really good accountant, good tax advisor, somebody to help keep your books and records in order, somebody that's going to try to help you figure out how to minimize your tax bill within the bounds of the law. Good tax advice is worth having for sure. You might have a wealth manager that needs to be involved, and possibly for the seller as well, just depending on how things fit together. If you do have a wealth manager, wealth advisor, somebody that's managing your retirement, you really want to think about having a good conversation with them around the acquisition of a business, something that significant is going to play in heavily into your personal financial plan, and they should be included in that conversation. They may not have a lot to do in terms of the overall transaction, but you're real people with real priorities in life, and making sure that your team understands how to help you achieve your objectives is important, because they may look at something and say, hey, this really means that you can do this over here and this over there and everything else. You want to think about whether or not you need an industry or subject matter expert. I've seen folks try to buy businesses before where it wasn't a business that they had a lot of familiarity with. And sometimes it works out great, and sometimes it doesn't. And particularly when you're spending a bunch of money on putting together a new business, and you're putting, maybe pledging a house, taking out a personal guarantee, different things like that, really want to be in a position where enough about the business to make it a success, and not just something where you're thinking about, relying on the seller to be around to help you run it, if that makes sense. Obviously, and a little bit self-servingly, you want to think about having a good lawyer on your team. Making sure that as you understand what you're trying to achieve, the value you're trying to protect, the risks you're trying to avoid, what you're trying to acquire, you really want to think about making sure that your documents are in order so that the paperwork says, what you've expected it to say as you're putting things together. And then you also want to think about having a good insurance agent on your team. Insurance, having good legal documents is helpful, but you really want to make sure that you've got good insurance in place to protect the business. Banks are going to require it, third parties are going to require it, but you really want to make sure that you've got a competent business insurance agent who's going to help you through that process as well, to make sure you've got appropriate stuff in place. And you always want to be mindful that the person that has worked with you so far might be a good fit for it. and they might not be. And so you want to think about maybe having some updated conversations on some stuff.
Sam, if I could just jump in, I think this is just a great start of how to build the team, because I have a lot of entrepreneurs who I would say we probably get about 3 to 5 inquiries per month on purchasing a business. And it's much different than just starting a business. So I think
Right.
that this is something that I would reference going forward. And I appreciate that because as a part of our role and others in the community, it's really helpful to be able to guide them in the process. So I appreciate that.
Yep, you bet. Build your budget. You really want to make sure that you're building your budget on stuff. I've had folks come to me that want to do deals where they're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on stuff, and then they haven't planned anything for transactional expenses, and so they're going to go take this big risk on spending all this money to buy this property from somebody that they think they know, that they think they're comfortable with, and have decided, not to spend anything on legal, not to spend anything on accounting. They're just going to kind of wing it. And you really want to think about that up front. Sometimes it works out great, and sometimes, it's the ounce of, prevention versus the ton of cure. Just depending on what it is, especially when you're dealing with something like commercial real estate, where you could have environmental liabilities and other things like that. You just want to be really intentional, really mindful of that stuff. So sometimes you'll have brokers involved in terms of your budget, and so there might be brokerage fees. Especially if there's real estate involved. Sometimes if there's a business broker involved, there'll be legal fees involved. There can be accounting and tax related fees. There can be banking and closing costs. There could be appraisal. There could be environmental, and there could be other types of expenses that are involved. And so as you're thinking about how does this deal come together, you really want to think about understanding what are those costs going to be that I need to plan for, and am I prepared for those? What we frequently try to do with folks is, make sure we've got good upfront conversations about, hey, here's what we think it's going to cost on our end. Part of the reason we charge hourly, accountants charge hourly, and some other professional services charge hourly, is that as you get into the deal, you just learn more about it. And have a better understanding of what's important and what's not important, and know better how to put it together. We try to help our clients when we're working on stuff, try to figure out how to delay the legal spend, for example, until we're a little bit farther into the process, so that if there is not a deal to be had, or at least if it is something that can be quickly eliminated as a possibility for a deal, we want folks to try to be able to figure that out early, before they spend a bunch of money on lawyers, for example, on a deal that may not happen. And of course, there's always the risk that the deal doesn't happen and the bill is still due. But trying to help manage that, as much as we can, I think is really important. And whoever you work with, trying to have that expectation. You don't want to wait too long, because if you get into it and you've got a contractual obligation, then kind of the ship has sailed, so to speak. So. And by all means, if anybody has questions as we're going along, I'm happy to take them. I know we've got time for that at the end as well. Build your schedule. If you came to me today and said, hey, we want to close on this deal in 30 days, which I've had that one before, everybody better be on the same page and already have completed due diligence, and better be pretty darn simple in order to get there. It's really important to communicate early on up front. Here's kind of when I'd like to be done with things. Here's when I want to close. Here's when the seller wants to close, so that everybody on your team has a good understanding of how they need to be moving through the process, what they need to be doing in order to get you done on the appropriate timeline. Here's some things that you want to think about when you're figuring out, okay, I want to be closed on my deal by July 1 or June 1 or whatever. Here's some of the things I need to be thinking about. Initial negotiations take time. What is that evaluation? So initial negotiations kind of being like, hey, the seller's like, I want to sell, I'd like $1 million. And you're looking at like, I think it's maybe 800,000, or whatever it might be. That sort of flavor is thinking about some of those initial negotiations, but those need to be really clearly with the understanding that, hey, as we get more into the business, we do some more due diligence, we do some more evaluation, we're going to learn more, and we might need to come back to some of that stuff. And so you don't want to, if you can help it, get stuck into a position that you can't get out of before you really know enough about the business. You want to do your evaluation and due diligence when you're buying. That's something that some people just blow through. There's, particularly on certain deals, we're not invited to do any due diligence. That's up to the client whether or not they want us to be involved in some of that stuff. But at a minimum, you as a buyer need to understand what it is that you're buying. As you go back to, why am I buying this? What's the risk? What's the value I'm trying to take advantage of? You really want to be in a position where you have properly understood what those are. For example, if you're buying a business and a key value that you've identified as a salesperson, and then you peel back the layer and see that the salesperson is the owner's son-in-law, and the reason that they're so productive is because, father-in-law wants to see his grandkids have a really nice life and has been spoon feeding, all of the good accounts over to, son-in-law, for example. That part of due diligence helps you to better understand, where's the real value coming from. In that scenario, it may not be son-in-law, it may actually be father-in-law. And so, that can help you to understand and really plan better on some stuff. And that's, due diligence is necessary in order to properly do that. As you can, in a lot of these phases, a lot of these items really overlap. You're going to think about additional negotiations. That's going to sort of stem out of, what does our due diligence look like? You're going to have documentation, you're going to have financing, you're going to have closing, and then you're going to have post-closing. And that, as I've noted, is where the real fun begins, or the real work and the real fun. And so,
can I jump in back there?
Absolutely.
So a couple of things that I just wanted to compliment to his presentation is, on certain types of loans that we assist with through the Small Business Administration and even through the Economic Development Administration, they do require evaluation. So whether some of those do not allow you to just do your own evaluation or due diligence, those would have to be certified individuals in order to provide that evaluation with an actual dollar amount valuation of the business and a listing of exactly what you're purchasing. So when you're getting into financing and requesting financing for the purchase of your business, it gets narrow in terms of what is required. On the financing side, if you're coming and saying, I need to close within 30 days, if you're going to have to use an SBA instrument, that won't be achieved. So for our more complex loans, and I'm talking loans over 375 that are having to go through the SBA, we are seeing about 90 to 120 days for approvals. And that's if there's no problems. What happens is it typically takes 30 to 45 days to really get everything that's required in order to be able to submit to the SBA. Any questions that they have, that can add an additional 10 to 15 days to coordinate with the SBA. And like Sam mentioned, you have to make sure that your team understands this is a full-time job, and that we all have to kind of run at the same pace in order to meet your desire. And so there's only so much that SCED can do, because we are just a facilitator of SBA loans. We don't have any control on how fast or slow it goes. So just keep that in mind in terms of what we're seeing with COVID and the disruptions. And, overall, the usage of SBA loans has dramatically increased within the past year. And so just the demand is such that there's been a slowdown.
Yep. Next, you want to kind of think about your deal terms as you're getting into the actual meat of the negotiations. You want to think about, how is all this going to fit together? What are the key terms going to be? And this is certainly something that your professional team can provide a lot of help with in terms of helping you put this together. there's, think about the structure. What exactly is the structure going to be that you're going to have? Are you going to be buying the assets, which is most common in this market? Are you going to be buying the stock or the LLC units or some other instrument where you're actually buying into ownership of the entity, or are you going to be merging an existing entity with the target company? Which, vast majority of the time it's going to be asset deal. Sometimes it'll be a stock deal where you're buying the stock. The main thing to keep in mind if you're buying into the actual stock of a business is that you are actually buying that business. And except for excluded assets or excluded liabilities in that transaction, you're picking up the whole kit and caboodle of whatever's there. And so when you think about those risks that you're concerned about, those liabilities, and you're asking the seller, hey, if something happens over here, you got to make me whole. The value of that contractual right is only going to be as good as the seller's pocketbook on that particular day where that risk becomes a reality. And that's frequently why you'll see asset deals, is that there's a better way, and there's no perfect way, but there's a better way to position yourself to avoid the risks of the seller entity, which we are really want to help you avoid your risks if we can. There's never a risk-free deal. We got clients all the time. Just keep me safe. Just take care of me. Just keep me safe. I'm like, there's no, there's no perfect. There's no safe. There's steps we can take to mitigate risk to try to help control risk, but there's no perfect out there. The purchase price and payment terms. You really want to be thinking about this stuff. How exactly is it going to fit together? Sometimes you'll have a seller who has an inflated value of the business. The business value is way up here. And you've got a buyer who's like, well, it's worth that to you because X, Y, and Z. To me, it's we're right here. And so you've really got to figure out early on, I think, whether or not you're on the same page on price. And then there's some creative things that you can do in terms of price to really get it into a place where if there's a good deal to be had, it can be had in a way that's fair. Frequently the seller's thinking about the go forward value, or sometimes they're thinking about the historic value, and the buyer's thinking about, well, this is new for me, I've got to get a step into this and take it over, I've got all these uncontrolled things. And so what's sometimes done is what's called an earnout, where we're going to say, hey, we both agree it's worth at least X. And so that's what the base purchase price is going to be. And then we're going to have some component in here that says, hey, if we hit these thresholds or these milestones, as we're going, then, I'm going to pay you more. I'm going to have an obligation to pay you more. Obviously that gets more complicated, and, more complexity means sometimes more risk, sometimes more obligation, and it definitely means more cost. But if there's a good deal to be had, then those added complexities and costs can sometimes really create some value for you in the process of getting a good deal done. You also want to think about payment terms. Frequently, who all here is familiar with a seller carry? Anybody know what a seller carry or seller financing is? Yep. All right, you get a couple of hands. That's great. So sometimes part of the financing is that, there's limits on this, especially with SBA lending. I believe there's statutory limits on what can actually be financed, but you've got a seller that comes in and says, hey, to help make this deal get done, I'll help finance the deal effectively by taking on, some, as part of the purchase price, I'm going to accept a promissory note from the buyer that says they're going to pay me X dollars, over time. And sometimes that's structured a little differently into the purchase, the purchase documents, et cetera. But that's sometimes an option. There's also sometimes the payments spread out a little bit, where you've got, payment due at closing, and then you might have something due a year later, or would say, okay, you always want to be thinking about things like non-competes, non-solicitation, those types of provisions. what you want to avoid as a buyer, depending on the nature of the purchase and what's reasonable and everything else, and what the seller, of course, will agree to and what you're comfortable with, is you don't want to hand somebody a check and then see them open up your competitor across the street. And if you don't have a non-compete, it's going to be difficult to have a legal right that prevents them from doing that. So you want to be just very, very mindful, very sensitive to those kind of things. A non-solicitation is different than a non-compete. Non-compete says, hey, you're not going to go out and start my competitor. A non-solicitation is going to say, hey, you're not going to go steal my customers, steal my suppliers, steal my key relationships, steal my employees. Going back to thinking about what are the key value, the key risks, those kind of things. If, for example, you're buying a business where the key value is, particular customers or particular employees, you don't want to end up in a spot where, the seller then, who has a deeper, longer relationship with all of them, is in a position to kind of siphon that value off from you in some way, or just to say, hey, I don't really like so-and-so. I don't think you should probably do business with them anymore. I don't think they're going to do as good a job as I did, that kind of thing. So you just want to be mindful, be intentional about those things. Think about indemnity provisions. This is a more clear contractual right to say, hey, if these things happen, you're going to make me whole, and here's how it's going to happen. And then representations and warranties. Who likes really long, complex legal documents? Show of hands. Okay, me neither. So we're all on the same page. Representations and warranties are really important because throughout the process of doing your due diligence, having your negotiations with the seller, they're going to be telling you all kinds of things about how their business works and how the assets work, how the liabilities are structured, all different kinds of things. And you're going to be relying on those as you put the deal together. And so the representations and warranties are really important to you to be able to say, for example, hey, here's I'm getting all the assets, they work, there aren't any liens on them, that kind of stuff. And so, so that you have a contractual right, if the seller has misrepresented something to you, to be able to go back to the seller and say, hey, look, you didn't, you didn't take care of this. This is your problem. So, it's in violation of your representations and warranties. So here's my claim, that I've got against it. So, so those are some basic terms. You also want to think about closing time, how that's going to work. Just real briefly, there's two general structures. There's a simultaneous sign and close, and then there's a delayed, a signing and then a delayed closing. On most deals that we do, it's simultaneous. Everything's happening at the same time, just from a simplicity standpoint. But sometimes what you'll have is the documents get signed, and then everybody's got a period of time to kind of confirm and refine numbers and nail stuff down. And then there's a closing that's a little bit after that. So just kind of varies from case to case. All right. Who has questions that I can help with?
I had one regarding the non-compete in the.
Sorry, what's that?
Sorry, Sam.
Go ahead.
I was wondering about the non-compete and the non-solicitation. Is there like a standard length of time in which those would be in place, or does it vary?
It definitely varies. Some of the things that you want to think about, the length of time you need as a buyer to really lock down the value that you're getting, to kind of cement those relationships. In Kansas, in the purchase of a business, about as far out as you can go is about 5 years. And so we frequently, we'll just say, hey, we're going to go for 5 years. Try to make it a really long period. And if the seller is uncomfortable with that, don't have any plans to get back in, and then they push back on something like a 5-year non-compete, it really puts you in a good position to say, well, you just told me you were getting out of the business. You don't really have any plans to get back in. What's the problem with saying you're going to stay on the sidelines for a long time? And there can be circumstances where longer or shorter is a better fit. You also want to be thinking about if the seller is going to stay on as an employee, or the principal owner, for example, is going to stay on as an employee, or they're separate non-competes for certain individuals as well as for the business and its owners. If that makes sense. Give me just a second.
Hey, Sam.
Yep.
Sam,
Yes.
this is Brian. Does it matter when it comes to a purchase agreement? Does it matter whether the seller or the buyer's attorney puts the agreement together?
So I'd say it's most customary for the buyer's attorney to put the agreement together. And I'd say that's usually because the buyer is going to have a little bit more detailed eye to what they're trying to accomplish on the go forward. And I'd say certainly, as somebody, when I'm representing buyers, we like to draft, because usually whoever puts the first starting point in place is going to end up getting something closer to what they want, rather than, trying to come back in and say, hey, well, you didn't put any reps and warranties, you didn't put any non-compete. Here's these 18 things I need, as opposed to, coming back and just making up numbers. Here's these 5 things I need. So I'd say it's most customary for it to be the purchaser's attorney to put it together, but it definitely has to be this way or that way kind of thing. Does that answer your question, Brian?
Yes, it does. I have another one. So I'm currently trying to purchase two businesses from the same people, and for the buying procedure purpose, I have formed and got everything set up for one LLC. Do I need to have both of them set up prior to the closing or the purchase, or is one sufficient, and from that point I take it to an accountant and then have it set up like we need to have it set up?
So that's a little bit more in-depth question than I think I'm probably comfortable answering here. If you would just give me a call after this, we talk to you about that in more detail. From a general standpoint, the entity that ends up being the actual buyer could be formed as late as the day of the closing, for example. The thing you always want to be mindful of is what their roles are and what's going to be done in the transaction.
Okay.
So, yep.
Thank you, Sam. I just wanted to kind of walk you through some of the things that I'm seeing with all of the inquiries that we get from from individuals who are looking to buy a business. What are some of, Sam, the kind of commonalities if I am going to purchase a business? What are just some common things that entrepreneurs should be asking for as they're exploring about potentially purchasing the business?
What are some things that they should be asking for as far as
financials, asset listing, etc.?
Right. So I think it all kind of starts with asking yourself that kind of key question: why am I doing the deal? What is the key value that I'm trying to achieve? And then what is the key risks that I'm trying to manage? And thinking about it primarily through that lens as a starting point, because that's going to guide what are the specific things that you ask for. I think you definitely want to ask for financials. Almost always. It'd be pretty rare where you didn't really care what the financials said. So you definitely want to think about those. Think about bank statements, think about tax returns as being some things where you can kind of, at least on a rough level, say, okay, well, your financials say this, but your bank statements and your tax returns say this. So help me understand, where the difference is. You always want to do kind of a reasonableness check. If the seller is presenting something to you as performing at a particular level, they should have at least some kind of documents to back up that that's what the case is. Financial statements, at least good financial statements, can also tell you a lot about the business. The seller says, hey, we don't have any debt. And then you go through and you find out, well, hey, you've listed these liabilities here. Maybe you weren't thinking about them as bank debt or something else or secured debt, but you owe folks, a lot of money. So you want to be thinking about stuff like that. You also want to be thinking about, as you're going through that, what the financials tell you about how the business itself works and what its profitability is. One of the things that I frequently see is that somebody says, hey, the EBITDA on this business, the net cash flow is at a particular level. And then you look at it closer and you find out that the seller's not factoring in how much they're paying themselves, or at least the owner isn't factoring in how much they're paying themselves. And so that can be really important. Some of the other things you want to think about is form contracts. If they've got customer contracts that are really important to the business, you want to kind of understand, how do those work? How long are those in place for? What are customer expectations? What are the risks that they're going to be looking at there? What kind of lien searches can you run on the business and on the owners? Perhaps a judgment or a litigation search. Trying to find out if there's liabilities out there that you need to be concerned about. Because the seller may not be organized enough or have a good enough understanding of what it is that they have or that they're exposed to try to help answer that for you. You also want to think about trying to get some copies of contracts with employees. One of the key risk centers for any business is going to be the employee piece. And so trying to make sure that that's been handled appropriately, or if you've got a bunch of people on the team that are really important and have access to key relationships, as soon as you close on the deal, they might walk across the street to the competitor and take all your relationships with you. That might not be something you can go after the seller on. And so you might, if there's not anything in place, you might want to make part of your process on getting the deal done, getting contracts in place with those particular employees. That's going to put you in a position to say, hey, I've at least got a legal right to go after them and prevent them from going out and upsetting the business. So we talked about tax returns, we talked about financial statements, talked about lien and litigation searches. If there's real estate involved, title reports, title commitments, any kind of real estate documentation, looking at the deed, making sure that it's actually owned the way they think it's owned. You really want to try to understand where there's documentation of ownership of particular key assets, who's actually listed on the ownership. Is it actually something that's owned by that entity as part of your due diligence? It doesn't make sense to run to ground every ballpoint pen and cup in the office, but that's again where going back to why are you buying it, what's important, what do you value, and then understanding, okay, if I want to make sure I've got that, have I asked enough questions? Have I looked at enough detailed documentation to try to understand that? You want to ask for, or at least think about asking for, copies of, or at least written responses to questions about, have you been sued? Have you been investigated for these kind of things, this, that, and the other thing? So that, if they have, you've got an opportunity to ask follow-up questions and say, okay, so you told me you had a Department of Labor investigation last year because you were treating all of your people as independent contractors. And then it turns out that none of them were independent contractors and they were employees. And, where is that at? Walk me through how you've gotten that cleaned up and those types of things. I'm trying to think here on some other key stuff.
I think
this is where it gets fairly. Yeah, sure.
No, I was just saying, I think that's a great kind of high level explanation of things to be considering, because what we're finding is oftentimes even entrepreneurs don't understand what that first question is. And so we do a lot of guidance, and these are just kind of some typical disclosures that all entrepreneurs are asking in the transaction of the sale of a purchase. And so that's helpful. Does anyone else, Brian, we thank you for your question. Does anyone else have questions? I have maybe just one more some commonalities that I see, but I would like to take anyone else's questions. Okay, so one of the things that I see is people not having a purchase contract in place. And so as a requirement for the loans that we facilitate, a purchase contract is required when you're purchasing a business. And so oftentimes they may say, I don't have the money for an attorney, or I don't know an attorney. Can you kind of just at a high level or generally tell us the risk of Googling a purchase contract and the risk that that could potentially open up for an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So every business is different. And the purchase contract, if you pull one off of the internet, for example, you won't have any idea whether or not that's a good fit for your particular business. We're actually trying to help somebody clean up one right now where that appears to have been the case. And so when you're doing your deal and you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on your business, spending 15, 20, 30 minutes, an hour on Google to try to find a purchase agreement, it's not going to get you a document that fits your deal. It's one of those things where, as you're thinking about what your own personal investment is in this, the risk that you're taking on, the value that you're trying to achieve, you can end up with a lot of risk, a lot of additional risk if you're just pulling a purchase contract off of the internet. It's expensive to buy a business. For example, if you've got a deal document that says, hey, I'm buying, an attached list of assets, and it's just that attached list of assets, and you ended up not including something, catch-all language to try to capture the rest of the value, you may end up legally missing out on some of the assets that you wanted. Or if you had, an expectation that the seller was going to be taking all the liabilities, and you don't have something in there that says, the seller's taking on all the liabilities and is going to pay them off at closing. There could be any other number of things. You don't have good reps and warranties in there that say, what the seller's promising to do. And so you risk taking the assets as is, and then not having a claim against the seller, or at least not a specific claim that lines up with your understanding of the deal and their understanding of the deal. And so, it's one of those where, you got to end up spending some more money on a deal that already is going to feel expensive. But the goal is to try to get, the paperwork and everything else to reasonably line up with what the deal is.
Yeah.
In terms of setting expectations, it's important to kind of remember that, there's the lean and mean end of the spectrum, which the leanest and meanest would be go Google it, which I do not advise. And then the bells and the whistles and everything else in between, where you end up spending just tons and tons of money on the deal. And, sometimes that's appropriate and sometimes it's not. We, and I think a lot of other attorneys, try to strike a balance of figuring out what is the value, what is reasonable, trying to put stuff in place, knowing that nothing's ever going to be perfect. You're never going to have a perfect deal, never going to have a perfect set of documents. There's always going to be something that's going to pop up. You're going to be like, I wish we had that, or I wish we had this. And it's just kind of the nature of doing deals. But you want to, try to make sure you've got the big pieces covered. And if you just Google something, you may miss something really important that you wanted to have. So. Yep.
Well, thank you, Sam. Yeah, I mean, that's really helpful. We really appreciate your time today. We appreciate all that you've given us. We want to respect your time and let you continue to make that impact that you're doing. If you guys haven't heard about Sam, he is out in that entrepreneurial ecosystem supporting entrepreneurs in our region. So he is just a great resource. And as I had stated earlier, our organization is working to try to see how he can continue to just complement our team and provide perhaps just some more availability to our borrowers. So we hope that we can get that coordinated for you guys. Sam's information is there on the power screen. Sam, this presentation made me think maybe we can have you back in 6 or 8 months and talk about the other side of this. So selling the business. We've had a lot of people dancing and flirting with the idea of retiring, but we're seeing a lot of that movement of actually going forward and they're ready to retire. And so I think that if we could maybe have you back in about 6 or 8 months and have you talk about the other side of it for those individuals who are ready to say, okay, I'm ready to hang up my hat. So hopefully we can have him back for that.
No, I'd love that. Always happy to help however we can.
Great.
Let me just post in the comments here. I've got a direct line. I'll post in the comments, and then you all can email that around if you'd like. So let me find the comment button in here. I'll just send it to you if you don't mind forwarding it around to participants, and we'll go from there.
Hey, Sam, sorry. Sam, are you available after this presentation? Or is there a good time to call you?
I've got some time. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I'll just post my direct dial here in the chat.
Great. Okay, guys. Well, I really appreciate you guys joining us. Like I said, in the coming months, we're going to have various topics, various entrepreneurial topics available for our borrowers and really just the general public. So please stay connected with our Facebook page, like us on Facebook. And we hope to have Sam back to talk about on the other side in about 6 months on how to prepare for selling my business. So Sam, thank you again, and appreciate everybody's time. See you guys.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.